In modernity, monogamy is often defined to mean one partner at a time, or in other words, anything short of a harem. As the sexual revolution enters its third generation, the figures are becoming clear. A greater number of sexual partners corresponds to a lower success rate in a later marriage. Marriage as we know it cannot coexist with free love, yet weddings continue to be performed. Now, we govern ourselves by our decisions, not by averages, but we must acknowledge averages if we are to avoid following courses of least resistance into the traps which are laid for us. In the same vein, the legislator's whip hand should be tempered by the understanding that, taken against a backdrop of demographic trends, even a comprehensive knowledge of an individual's private life will fail to elucidate the contents of their wallet, handbag, mind, or soul. All the same, universal edicts must relate to demographic realities. For our purposes, it is right to generalize. My remark concerns the current debate between Roman Catholics who probably lament the current sexual climate but whose conclusions are simultaneously driving it. In Catholic theology, divorce is not recognized, and anyone who subsequently sleeps with someone who is not their original and only spouse is thereby committing adultery. A Catholic living in adultery may not receive the sacrament of the Eucharist, effectively severing them, and their fellow adulterer, from communion with the Church. Those rules cannot be changed even by a pope. Of course, the councils which hammered this out could never have predicted the conditions which have made our era's unprecedented carnal binge possible. Catholics are not immune from the awesome effect that free love has had upon marriage. As their civil divorce rate rockets just behind the societal mean, so too rises the demand for that holy grail of the libertine Catholic, the subsequent marriage. Will Rome hold the line for its professed dogma? The signs aren't promising. Although Catholics don't recognize divorce, they may receive an annulment, which, plus ça change, declares that the marriage was actually invalid, so a valid marriage may subsequently take place. The Church appears to have ramped up the annulment mill year on year to meet the demands of the civil divorce rate. Whether we will see an equal and opposite effect to ensure that null marriages do not occur in the first place, free love now seems to have another contingency plan. In 2016, Pope Francis released an encyclical named The Joy of Love. Amoris Laetitia appears calculated to straddle the aforementioned line of legality regarding divorce and remarriage, containing ambiguities about who may receive communion in subsequent sexual relationships where an annulment had not been obtained. A number of senior clergy and academics have asked the Pope to clarify that the Church's position has not changed, because it hasn't, and their dubia has gone unanswered for nearly half a decade. At the heart of this stalemate is an attempt to recreate something which resembles the Eastern pastoral oikonomia on terms of Roman Catholic dogma. Typically perceived as a standoff between mercy and dogma, deliberations over Amoris Laetitia may follow a reduction to absurdity for some time yet, but that, after all, is the point. As long as the Pope fails to settle this, subsequent sexual unions may seem permissible to still married Catholics without necessarily debasing the fiat value imparted to the Roman wedding rite by its dramatic vows and legal absolutes. Despite appearances, however, the Pope has not achieved the impossible. This is actually a standoff between mercy, dogma, and authority. To the extent that the Pope may have reconciled the first two elements of the trilemma, he debases the last. Pope Francis's opinions on fashionable subjects, such as Mother Earth, are not all promulgated in encyclicals. However, they do give us a strong idea as to the thinking behind those which are. God always forgives, man sometimes forgives, nature never forgives, is a favourite aphorism of his. But nowhere is our understanding of nature so warped, and deliberately warped, as in matters of human sexuality. Marriage exists as a fact of human ecology because societies everywhere must tackle the complex task of persuading individuals to stay together with their children when at any moment they might want to pair up with someone else. Scolded libertines may attempt to silence their critics with a tu quoque sneer, but only tend to promote sexual deregulation while the carnal marketplace is in their favour. This brings us to perhaps the greatest unacknowledged truth of the sexual revolution. There is a stage of the fornicator's strategy which demands socially reinforced monogamy in the other party. Our culture responds by attempting to make virtues of this necessity, upholding smokescreens of chivalry and right that cater to the libertine's needs. Whether hypocritical or cynical, marriage becomes the go-to tool of social control. 3 generations into the sexual revolution, less suitable spouses have become more necessitous of the heavy hand of dogma and law. But dressing this default in the mantle of Christian responsibility is neither dignified nor sustainable. It lures people unsuited to marriage with the impression that they can substitute religious fervour for personal qualities, and even turns marital strife into a kind of virtue signalling. And of course, it doesn't work. Powerless to uphold the law in the face of the demographic reality of divorce, Rome's response is a contradiction of its own canons. Like every edict of the sexual revolution, the chaos surrounding Amoris Laetitia serves carnal instincts unfettered from social and human oversight. It is literally dehumanizing. The tragedy is that by acting in accordance with fashionable modern interpretations of natural law rather than abiding by canon law, Pope Francis succeeds in upholding neither. He has promoted a lopsided notion of marriage which holds the chaste and obedient more and more accountable for a situation in which they have less and less agency. Those who stand by Rome's true teaching sometimes live out solitary lives to honour a marriage which has long broken down, and possibly to the credit of their eternal souls. However, the Church which upholds that marriage as a legal fiction now appears to be accepting their canonical spouses philandering elsewhere. Catholics cannot dismiss their Church as just another secular agent of white martyrdom when it is the very embodiment of their spiritual cause. Refusing to be clear about what the rules are across its universal jurisdiction, Rome has opened a crack across its entire sacramental stage, for it is impossible to abuse one sacrament without abusing others. A die-hard core of the Roman Church will surely keep vigil as the Western Christendom crosses the nadir, but the hierarchy above them must realize what is happening. Like the parent who settles disputes by telling their children to fight it out among themselves, Rome is undermining itself as a source of moral authority. How can they fix this? I'm no lawyer, but however Rome rationalizes their next move, it looks to me like they are on course for a default which will bring them back in line with a reality which will look very much as the orthodox reality always has. I would hate for any faithful Roman Catholic listening to this to believe themselves deceived by their faith. All the same, this problem needs ruthless and unhypocritical examination in light of secular trends. I share many cradle Catholics' revulsion at oikonomia's concept of second and even third marriages, but on the other hand, oughtn't we all to strive to be the best for our husbands and wives? The bottom line is that people are at risk of being misled to believe that marriages are maintained by legal structures. Never has this fallacy been more prevalent and less true than today. Good marriages require good spouses, not heavy-handed dogma.